Hey everyone, time for another Q&A video. I've got a couple of questions I'd like to cover in this video, so I'll get straight to it. Okay, so the first question is about how much I practice and how I practice as well. So I'll talk a little bit about that. I would say on average I practice between 1 and 3 hours a day. It can vary a little bit. On a good day, it's 3 hours, maybe even more. On days when I've got lots on, then I might only get like an hour in. I find generally an hour's practice is kind of maintenance for me. That's just kind of treading water, just ticking over. If I really want to improve my playing, add to my playing, and learn things, then I need more than an hour. And so that's when I'll have like periods of growth when I can put longer spells in. When we're on the road with gigs and touring about and stuff like that, I won't get that much practice in, but I am playing a lot because I'm on stage playing, and I also get time in like sound checks, and I sit out back warming up for at least an hour usually before a gig if I can. So I'm getting lots of playing in, but also, playing on stage on a gig, that's some of the best practice you can do as well. So I kind of count that as good practice. But when I'm at home, I'm usually learning things and practicing things and trying to add to my playing if possible. I will say that I think it's better to practice a bit every day than like say for example, if you practice say 8 hours on a Sunday and then don't play for the rest of the week, I think you're better off practicing like 1 hour a day, because coming back to your guitar and then putting it down and coming back to it and putting it down and coming back to it, you're kind of training yourself in recalling what you're learning. Whereas if you're just spending a long period of time playing and then leaving it for long periods before you come back, I don't think you learn so well. At least I don't anyway. I often break my practice into smaller chunks, and I'll take regular breaks. So I might play for half an hour, go and do something else for half an hour, come back, play for half an hour, go for a run, have lunch, come back, play for half an hour, that kind of thing. Sometimes I'll sit for, an hour or two, depending on what I'm working on. But I generally find smaller chunks is better. Obviously, I'm kind of lucky in that respect because playing guitar is my kind of job. So I can build my days around my guitar playing, which obviously I'm very lucky to be able to do that, to have the freedom to do that. But even if you're unable to do that, I recommend whatever time you have to practice, if you can break it down into smaller chunks and spread it over a longer period, that's a better way to learn, in my opinion. I also think the time of day is kind of important to me with practice. I like to get most of my practice done in the morning. I find that's when I'm most kind of alert and most able to focus. So I tend to play, I get up, have a coffee, I like to read a bit first thing in the morning, but then I get on the guitar pretty much straight away then. So I generally kind of have a bit of a rule that I'll play until around midday, and then around midday is when I'll go off and do some other things. But that might be, if I start say at 9 or 9:30 or 10 or something, even then that's going to be broken down. So say I started at 9 o'clock, I might play for half an hour, then I'll go and read for 20 minutes, and I'll come back and play for another half an hour, and then go back and have another coffee and then come back. So even when I'm there, even when I've allotted 2 or 3 hours, I might only get an hour and a half of actual playing in, because I like to break things down. So the other kind of side of this question is how I practice, and that can vary a lot, and over the years that has changed a lot as well. I don't have a kind of specific routine or a kind of regime or anything like that. I have tried that stuff over the years, and it just doesn't work for me. We're all different when it comes to the way we learn, and I think a really important part of learning to do anything really is learning how you learn. Learning what works best for you. And so my kind of practice is a constant trial and error, and has been for years. I'm constantly tweaking what I'm doing, and as I change as a musician, I'm changing how I'm practicing in order to focus on whatever kind of goals or things I'm trying to improve on. So it really does depend. Like I say, I've been through periods where I've tried to do like 20 minutes of arpeggios and half an hour of scales, and then practice this in all keys, and then practice that. As soon as things become too regimented like that, for me, it takes the fun out of it. And so my number one priority with my guitar playing is that I enjoy it. I put my enjoyment above all else. In fact, I put it way above everything else. Because in order to get good at something, you have to dedicate a lot of time to it. You're talking days after days, after weeks, after months, years, decades of time dedicated to something in order to really, really get good at something. And the biggest enemy of your progress is your kind of boredom and resentment of it. So you don't want it to be a chore. At least that's what I've learned about me. I don't want it to be something that feels like a chore or a job, or any kind of. I don't want to feel like I'm I don't want to feel like I'm back at school. I want it to feel like I'm having fun. I want it to be something that is an adventure, something that I really enjoy. So with that being said, I try and focus on things that I'm enjoying at the time that I'm enjoying them. And if I don't enjoy something, I won't do it. I just won't do it. And so that drives me to practice then. That drives me to want to pick up the guitar every day and want to learn something new, because I'm working on that idea, or I'm learning that song, or I'm writing this, or I'm coming up with ideas for the next gig I'm doing, or whatever, or I'm recording videos. The little videos that I do, the kind of reels and the short form videos and the little improvs and stuff, those are really good for me as a player, because they focus me to have they're a little goal that I can achieve. And I enjoy being creative and coming up with ideas, and then and recording those ideas. And so that's been a good thing for me, for my playing. But yeah, if routines work for you, then do them. But for me, they don't really work. So I spend most of my time, if I'm not kind of just keeping my chops together and maintaining my playing for a gig that's around the corner. The other thing I like to do is I like to learn. I love to listen to records and figure out what's going on, learn the chords, learn the melodies, learn some phrases, some lines. And it can be from anything as well. It's not just guitar players. In fact, probably, I don't know what the percentage would be actually, but I spend a lot of time learning vocal melodies, learning stuff from, saxophone players, piano players, anything I like the sound of, I'll try and learn it basically. I'll try and figure it out. And I also spend a lot of time improvising as well, just with a metronome on like 2 and 4. It's one of my favourite things to do. I have my metronome drum machine here, which I usually set on a basic 2 and 4 rhythm, or maybe some kind of basic swing rhythm, and I just play through changes, and I try and incorporate the ideas that I've been learning into my playing. and that is time consuming, because if you learn a short phrase, I find, you know, for that phrase to be learnt to the point where it influences your playing in the moment on a gig, you know, in the spur of the moment when the changes are flying by, that can take ages, that can take months, you know. Learning ideas, you really have to digest them and not just so that you can copy and paste them, but so that they can influence your playing. And and that takes a long time. So majority of my practice time is either sat around improvising or learning something. And then the other thing I do is, if I'm practicing for a gig or, you know, a recording or something, then I'll focus on whatever material I'm doing for that. So that's kind of in a nutshell kind of how I practice, but things are always changing, and I'm sure I'll talk about this again on another Q&A. So if there's anything I've missed out, I'll come back to it at another time. Okay, so the next question was actually a comment on one of my reels, and it goes like this. Okay, give me a simple and straight guide to learning to do this. Are you changing keys or just doing random accidentals and chromatic phrases? What are the rules for doing that type of rhythm vibe? Okay, so what I'll do is I'll edit in the video now so that you can see what we're talking about. Okay, so that was a short kind of improv vid that I did while I was at a venue. I'd got in early to set up a PA system, and I was waiting for the guys to turn up, so I was just kind of sat around playing, and I just filmed that little video on my phone. The changes to that tune are from a jazz standard called Donnelly, which is also the same changes to another standard called Indiana. I'm playing in the key of A flat, which is usually the Donnelly key. And before I break down the actual lines, I'm going to talk just a little bit about my overview of how I think when I'm playing. So when I'm improvising, and also if I'm ever kind of writing things as well, I'm always thinking about the chords underneath, whether that's a single chord or whether that's a chord sequence. I've always got that in my mind when I'm playing. I very rarely play notes without a kind of harmonic intention. Occasionally you might want to mess around with something a bit abstract, but generally I've always got a chord in mind. Even if I just pick up the guitar and I'm just kind of noodling away, I've got chords and I've got chord changes always in my head. I often think of the underlying like harmonic structure, the chords and chord sequences, that's like a topic, and then your playing or your lines or the melody, that's like you speaking on a topic. You know, you're talking about something. And so the chords are that topic, and then you're playing, that's your actual kind of, you're elaborating on a subject. So that's kind of how I play. So I've always got these changes in mind. So with that being said, let's look at the first few chord changes of Donnelly. So we're in the key of A flat. A flat is the 1, it starts on the A flat. And then goes to an F7, which is a 6, a dominant 6. Then a 2 dominant, which is B flat, B flat 7, and then a 2-5-1 back to A flat. So that's B minor 7, E flat 7 to an A flat, and then the changes go on from there. But we'll just look at that bit to start with. And I've got the video here on my phone, so I'm just going to play this. Hopefully this will pick up. Okay, so this bit's over the first two changes of the tune. Now, so this opening bit, I'm thinking A flat and here. So that is kind of almost like a bass line. You're basically playing. Whenever I hear that kind of phrase, I think of like a bass line, you know. Almost like a bass line Paul McCartney would play. Like, is it the Ballad of John and Yoko, where there's similar kind of bass line to that? But anyway, it's a kind of a typical bass line over a major chord, and you're using a semitone to shift into the third. It's also similar to Pride and Joy, Stevie Ray Vaughan, or is it? That kind of thing, that kind of blues vibe. And then the next bit, that's actually over the F7. Now this note here, the first note, implies an F7 sharp 9. You could also play a third instead of the minor third or the sharp 9. You could also play, so I could have played it like this. That's an alternative way of doing it. I think both work, you know, they're just slightly different melodically. And so that's what's going on in that opening phrase, is those two chords. Next chord is B flat. Now for the B flat, let's just see what So for that I'm just thinking all B flat, and I'm thinking of that chord, you know. You can analyze it in a few different ways, I guess, but this is 5, 6, 7, 6, 5. Those are the three notes that you often use. Those three notes you often use in this kind of thing, in rock and roll. You know, so that's one way of looking at it. So here I'm just doing chromatic between the, this is the 5 of the chord, this is the 3rd of the chord, and I'm connecting those. It's very common to connect the 3 and the 5. It's common to connect chord tones in general actually, but the 3 to the 5 is crops up a lot. And then I play the one note, and then here. Again, I'm just thinking that movement. You could say it's 9 flat 9 root, or you could say I'm going from a 9 to the 1 with a chromatic note in between. So you can describe it in a few different ways, but I'm basically in my head I'm on B flat. So that's the B flat. Next up is the 2-5-1, and this is a bit more of a complex line. I'll just play it for you now. Okay, and again. Okay, so it goes like this. And so there are a few things going on in here. It's kind of a combination of a few different ideas. Now it starts with these notes. I mean, there's actually a semitone kind of approach note first. But this kind of technically it's kind of a minor triad, but I'm actually thinking of this as just 5, 7, 9 of B flat. So it's the 5th, the 7th, and the 9th of B flat, and then this note just slides down one, and this kind of it's kind of it's a typical kind of bebop flavoured line, this. I can't remember where I first came across this, but Wes plays a similar line sometimes, like this, Wes Montgomery. Which is a line that I've definitely learnt from Wes Montgomery. It's in a slightly different context, but this idea of this kind of almost like, it's like a little slur, isn't it? But in this context, these 3 notes are all in sounding. They're strong notes. Now this note is like an out sound, and this is implying like a dominant altered sound, basically. So I'm talking like E flat 7, but with like altered tones. And then after this note, I drop into the diminished scale, just for those notes. And so this is E flat half whole. So that's the scale that I'm using there, just for a few notes. Okay, and then here, then I drop into, we're connecting, at this point I'm kind of thinking of the 5 chord, so the E flat 7, I'm connecting the 5 to the 3. Okay, similar to what we did over the B flat. And then here, this is a very kind of bebop thing to do, this chromaticism where you do this kind of, you know, it's very common to do that, you know, like where you go down chromatically and then you go back up a note and then you move the last chromatic note that you played down another semitone. And then this note happens to be like the kind of the sharp 9 of the dominant chord. Again, I'm thinking I'm thinking 5 here. I'm thinking E flat 7. And then this descending bit. There's a couple of ways of thinking about that. You could think of it as being the diminished scale again, half whole of E flat. You could also think of this bit as being E flat altered scale, resolving to like the 3 of the 1. You know, there's a few different ways of like approaching it, but basically this is sharp 9, flat 9, root 7 of the 5 chord of E flat. And then the last bit of the line, and again I'm connecting like the 5, it's the same thing I did there, but just in a lower octave, so it's the 5 to the 3 of the 5 chord, but at some point during this line we switched to the 1 chord as well, so where did that happen? Yeah, so I'm actually dragging the 5 over the 1, which I do quite a bit actually, is where you kind of you might be on the 1 chord, but you're still kind of pulling the 5 chord over the 1 to create more tension. So I'm kind of thinking of that as all 5, although at some point in that line, the one chord will appear, you know. Especially when you're playing solo unaccompanied, you can do things like that. There's a certain malleability to harmony. Now that last little phrase, so I'm chromatic from the 5 to the 3 of the 5 chord. Then I'm going back up to the first note, which is the 5, and to the 1 of A flat, so the A flat note. And you can think of that as being an enclosure in a way, because you're enclosing the root note that you're heading to. You're going below it by a semitone, above it by a scale tone, which is very common to do that. You can apply that to any chord tone really. So a semitone below and a scale tone above. And there are variations of that. You can go. You can go. You know, there are lots of various ways of enclosing target notes, and the target note in this case is the A flat, which is the one of the A flat. Again, this is very bebop flavoured. I would say this is a lot of my lines are influenced by bebop players. I've spent a lot of time kind of transcribing players within that style. I really love those type of jazz lines. So that's where this kind of stuff comes from. So this whole phrase, oh yeah, and then I finish like this. Now what I'm doing there is I'm making the one chord dominant, because I'm anticipating the next chord change, which is making the one chord dominant to lead to the 4 chord. Sorry if I'm getting a bit, if this is getting a bit kind of complex and meandering, but in my head that's what I'm doing. So I've gone you know, so there's a 5, 1, 1 dominant, and then a 4. So that's all happening in that. So those are the chords that are in my head while I'm doing this. And so yeah, so that whole line is like. So I'm kind of that's how it fits over the chords actually. So yeah, so I'm hitting just into the dominant chord. But anyway, that gives you hopefully that gives you an idea of how I'm kind of thinking. And so with a big long line there that kind of, you know, starts here and ends right down here, I think that if you're not kind of familiar with how these kind of lines work, you can sometimes look at a phrase like that and just think it's all in like one scale. But there's usually much more going on, at least certainly in the way I play anyway, and the players that I've transcribed. Within a big line like that, there are fragments of different ideas all strung together, and that's kind of that's how it works basically. And of course, the video goes on, but I'll kind of stop there because hopefully that demonstrates a bit about my kind of thought process when I'm playing. Now, obviously, when this thing is going by quite quickly, and when you improvise over changes, it happens quite quickly. So there's a lot of well-trodden kind of roots. We all have shapes and fingerings and patterns that we use a lot. You know, they become part of our playing, part of our identity. So all these ideas are things I use all the time, and in various different combinations. So they might not be strung together in exactly the same way every time, but you know, this kind of that idea which started the line, you know, I use that thing quite a lot. The the diminished scale I use a lot. I'm always connecting 5 to 3, and I'm always using these kind of, these kind of chromatic, all these kind of various different chromaticisms, various different ways. If you break down my playing, you'll see lots of that. So so that's kind of how it works. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Okay, so I'll do one more question in this video, and this is about gypsy jazz guitars. And the question is, I'm looking to buy a gypsy jazz guitar. Should I choose the D-hole or the oval hole guitar? Now, for me, if you want that kind of punchy mid-range, that kind of powerful percussive sound that is typical of a gypsy jazz guitar, I would go with the oval hole personally. They tend to have a bit more bark to them, and a slightly more focused, punchier sound. Now, one thing I should say that's definitely worth knowing about the differences between a D-hole and an oval hole. Obviously, the sound hole affects the tone. The smaller sound hole gives it a tighter sound. The bigger sound hole gives a more kind of slightly warmer sound generally. But actually, the main difference between a D-hole and a oval hole guitar is usually the scale length. So traditionally, a D-hole gypsy jazz guitar is shorter scale length than the oval hole. Now, an oval hole gypsy jazz guitar is one of the longest scale lengths that you'll get on a guitar that isn't detuned. So in standard tuning, baritone guitars can be long. But in terms of guitars that are designed to play in standard tuning, I've never come across longer scale lengths than what you get on an overhaul gypsy jazz guitar. Now, Gibson scale length is like 24 3/4 roughly. Strat scale length is 25.5. I think the D-hole is around 25.2. I think I could be wrong there, but a overhaul gypsy jazz guitar is like just over 26 1/3. So you're talking nearly an inch longer than a Strat. And what this does, obviously, it means the frets are slightly further apart, but it means the string is under a different tension. They're higher tension because it's longer, so it has to be tighter in order to get the pitch, which is why we tend to play generally lighter strings on a gypsy jazz guitar compared to a normal acoustic. In fact, gypsy jazz strings generally are only made in 10s or 11s. I've never seen gypsy jazz strings in 12s or above. And that's because the scale length compensates for a lighter string. And I've actually heard it said that if you put too heavy strings on a gypsy jazz guitar, it can actually mute it. It actually stop it resonating. I've never tried it because I don't want to damage my guitar, but I use 10s anyway. But the longer scale length contributes to that kind of this kind of sound, this kind of explosive sound. You can't get that sound out of a shorter scale guitar. At least I've never heard that. Not in the same way, that explosive, that kind of punchy, that tone, which is really great. That's the reason I love these guitars, is that very percussive, punchy tone. Short scale D-holes don't really do that. Now, you can get long scale D-holes, and I've played on them, but traditionally the D-hole was short scale. But in modern, you can go to a luthier now and say, can you make me a long scale gypsy jazz guitar but with a D-hole? And in fact, actually, I think when you see high-end D-holes, very often they are longer scale, because that will kind of marry the two in a way. It's kind of a middle ground. You'll get slightly the warmth of the D-hole, but you'll still get that kind of that attack of the longer scale length. So if you're looking to buy like an entry level gypsy jazz guitar, say for example a Gitan or a Sagano or something like that, the D hole will be a shorter scale guitar, at least in my experience they always are, and the overhole will be a longer scale guitar. So if you're choosing between those two, I would go with the overhole. Yeah, so but D holes sound great. I do actually want to get a D hole just to have a different flavour, you know, but I'll always use a longer scale guitar for that kind of percussive gypsy jazz sound. Cool, so I think we'll wrap it up there in this video, and hopefully that was helpful to everyone, and thanks for watching, and yeah, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.